Hello and welcome to the Underhive. We are back with Why Should You Buy Hades? Hades is a roguelike isometric brawler, and it's got excellent storytelling and a no-nonsense approach to gameplay. It was created and published by Supergiant Games, and they've also released Pyre, Transistor, and Bastion, if you're interested in some of their other games. Let's take a look at some of the features that I think are worthy of attention as to whether you should or shouldn't buy Hades. First up, story. You play as Zagreus, son of Hades and god of the underworld, and you're driven to leave the underworld and prepared to go through anything in your path to reach the surface. The gods of Olympus are each vying for the attention of Zagreus to benefit his cause and aid his escape from his father's domain. As an immortal, death is only a minor setback to you, and the resources earned throughout your attempt will fuel the skills that will extend your reach for future runs. Now, I will talk a bit more about the story at the end, but I don't want to spoil anything up front, so if you're not bothered about spoilers, you can stick around to the end for more on that. Next up, gameplay. The action starts immediately, and tutorialization is kept to a minimum, and you just take the reins immediately, choosing a gifted boon from a random god to shape the path of your mission to reach the top of the underworld and escape to the surface. The storytelling's delivered in and following a run, by swapping a collectible for more dialogue and text lore, as well as a bit that's dependent on your recent performance. The story flows into the gameplay and never impedes it, doesn't stop the core loop delivering on the enjoyment, but it does allow you that little break from it to hear more about the mythology surrounding the gods and the denizens of the underworld. The vast majority of the experiences a given run will involve feel very fitting to the theme, but I do think that one or two things are a bit disjointed. I understand that the Hydra boss fight is a warranted gameplay mechanic and a test of the skills that you've learned up to that point, but it doesn't really seem to fit with the other boss fights, which entail fighting a more fluid and manoeuvrable opponent. It just feels a bit less polished to me than the rest of the game, and it's of lower difficulty. Most of the other bosses have mechanics that will warrant you playing around them to achieve victory as efficiently as possible, but the Hydra can easily just be brute forced. But with that said, it doesn't take away from the game too much. It's still a fun boss fight, just not as good as the others, but the rest of the gameplay throughout the entirety of the game is really dynamic and fast paced, and it requires you to learn from the visual and audio cues you get to really get the most out of your run. The graphics. The cel-shaded art style's really pulled off throughout the entire game. I absolutely love the way the game looks. You can easily pick out the enemies from the background, and you could play purely based on the visual cues if you wanted to. The one downside for me is the death animation. It really doesn't seem to fit the fast-paced action, and it could have just been the normal animation for a hit that kills any of the other enemies, and that would be perfectly fine, I think. But it's not a deal breaker, it doesn't take away too much, it's just a 1 or 2 second stopgap that pulls you out of that high octane action. The sound. There is extensive voice acting of really high quality. There are a few voice effects used that I don't particularly like, that's personal taste. They do definitely fit the ethereal nature of the characters that they're used for. But the weapon effects and the enemy effects are spot on, no complaints about those whatsoever, they work brilliantly. The game's soundtrack's available separately and it really fits the theme to a T. It's not mind-blowing, but it does do the job well. I particularly like the second phase of the final boss music, but I'm not going to spoil that here. But we will just take a brief listen to the music. The characterization of the gods and the other voiced characters is firstly very well written, but secondly the fact that the voice acting is of such high quality really sets Hades apart from other roguelike games in immersing you in the characters and the story that you're dealing with.
A mortal's life is short and fraught with pain. Is that truly the life you yearn for, boy?
In conclusion, I absolutely love Hades. Should you buy it? Yes, you should, in my opinion. I paid full price for it, and I think I've got my money's worth already, but I've still got a lot that I want to do in the game, because there's an awful lot of replayability, even by the standards of roguelites generally, which are built around that as a premise. I do think it's worth the full price, and that is what I paid for it. But if you wanted to pop it on your wish list and just take it up when it's on sale, again, I think you're getting fantastic value for money for that. Now, I did mention earlier on I was going to talk a bit more about the story, so if you don't want to hear any spoilers, you might want to end the video now. Thank you for watching as far as you have. But otherwise, if you wanted to hear a bit more about the story, I'm going to discuss some here for you now. I absolutely love the lore. Greek mythology anyway is interesting, but Hades delivers it in a really well-told manner and has its own little narrative twists. I don't know everything about Greek mythology to know how much of this is canon of the myths or how much of it is their own twist. Zagreus was fated never to have lived, in that Hades was prophesied to dwell in the underworld and rule over the realm of the dead, never to have an heir. Born without life, Zagreus would never have existed at all without the aid of Nyx, but this was not immediate. In the meantime, Persephone, Zagreus' mother, had decided she couldn't continue to live in the underworld without a feeling of belonging, and so with the aid of Nyx, she fled to the surface. Nyx then went against the plans of her daughters, the Fates, and gave life to Zagreus. He could only exist within the underworld, and his life force is drained upon leaving, giving him only a few moments to commune with his mother on the surface before once again returning to the halls of his father's house. Though the gods aid Zagreus in his escape, they're fickle and close-minded. If they were to know the means Zagreus came to be, and by extension how Persephone came to reside in the underworld, there would be war between the gods of Olympus and the Lord of the Underworld. Some creative license is taken on the lore behind characters such as Achilles, Charon, and Sisyphus, and to a greater extent with their own creations like Skelly and Juicer. But I think the gods are portrayed in a very relatable way. You would recognise them even without their nameplate by the words and the descriptions they give, and also the illustrations being very clear and thematic around them. I haven't reached the epilogue yet of the game, but I believe that either the gods will prove themselves not as fickle as I suspect, and they won't start a war even though they find out, and it will all be forgiven, or perhaps in an effort to make a Hades 2 out of it maybe, they will disown Hades and stop offering him aid in the canon, although you'll be still able to carry on, presumably, and they would then wish to seek an all-out war against Hades. As it goes, I would be up for that, because I'd like to see a sequel to this where we get the boons of the underworld. So we're getting boons from Nyx and Hades and maybe Cerberus and Achilles, and looking to reach the heights of Olympus maybe, rather than escape the underworld. It's just a thought. Maybe they wouldn't go on to do that. I do think the game works perfectly well, doesn't need a sequel, but I would be pretty happy to see it if they did do that. So just a little thought. Well, that's enough to round it off. As we mentioned earlier on, I highly recommend you go ahead and get yourself this game if you're into roguelikes or roguelites in any way. But otherwise, that's enough for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time in the Underhive.